HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Society and the Internet, 2nd edition. How Networks of Information and Communication Are Changing Our Lives. Edited by Mark Graham and William H. Dutton. Read by Keith Sellon-Wright. Foreword. Internet: Utopia, Dystopia, and Scholarly Research. The Internet has become the fabric into which our lives are woven. It is relentlessly changing our communication environment, and communication is the essence of being humans. It is not, I think, thus I exist, but I communicate, thus I exist. If I do not communicate, no one knows what I thought, and therefore I exist only in my inner self, which only becomes fully human when I leave my shell and I venture into the wonders and surprises of life. Indeed, forms and technologies of communication have differentiated our societies throughout history. The advent of the Internet has represented a quantum leap in the transformation of communication. Yet half a century after its first deployment, in 1969, the social meaning of this interactive, multidirectional, global digital network of communication remains obscured in the media, in the institutions, and in people's minds by the utopias and dystopias that emerged from the very moment of its inception. Utopians hailed the Internet as the coming of the kingdom of freedom, freedom from the state and from big corporations. Dystopians warned against a technology that would bring widespread isolation and alienation to society, as people would be transformed into nerds mired to their computers day and night, leaving reality and being submerged into virtuality. Furthermore, Big Brother would use the pervasiveness of the Internet to construct a digital panopticon and establish a surveillance system as never before possible. Both positions were proven right and wrong at the same time. On the one hand, it is true that unfettered, multimodal, ubiquitous communication has extraordinarily enhanced the capacity of individuals to construct the networks of their lives. In so doing, they have largely bypassed the mass media control exerted by either governments or media corporations, creating a space of autonomy that has impacted everything from business to social movements, from cultural creativity to the rise of the sharing economy. However, states have rushed to limit the newly developed free communication by setting up sophisticated systems of censorship, by blocking access to websites, by approving and enforcing restrictive legislation, by engaging in cyber warfare, and by inducing massive disinformation amplified by armies of robots that populate digital networks. As for the corporations running these networks, they have become gigantic oligopolies and have used their control of traffic to transform our lives into data, the sources of their profits. Data capitalism is a fundamental industry of the 21st century economy. Freedom of information is the subject of a decisive fight against the freedom of producing and propagating fake news. On the other hand, the myth of the alienated Internet user has been debunked repeatedly by a flurry of studies that have found the obvious. Sociability is hybrid, as it always was, made of both face-to-face and technology-mediated interaction. Of course, there are people alienated and isolated among users, as they are in the whole of society. In fact, the Internet has alleviated these feelings by providing an alternative for people who tend not to be very sociable. And yes, a new pattern of sociability has emerged. It is what we conceptualize as networked individualism. Individualism is the predominant culture of our societies because of a number of factors that are not rooted in technology. What the Internet does is to provide an appropriate platform for the full development of this new form of sociability. The Internet and social media are as sociable as any other forms of mediated communication. In traditional sociological terms, we moved from community to association, and then from association to networking. Yet the dystopian view of the Internet finds strong support in the extraordinary rise of government surveillance apparatuses after 2001, exploiting the emotion and the fear caused by the terrorist attacks on 9/11. As Michael Hayden, the director of the U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, said at the time, referring to the difficulty of finding terrorists in a world of ever-growing information, "In order to find a needle in a haystack, I need the entire haystack." Thus, while most of the alarm about the power of digital Big Brother has been aimed at the attempt to control Internet communication by China, in fact, the NSA has become the core of the most comprehensive surveillance system on the planet, particularly through its connection with the sophisticated British intelligence agency GCHQ and their counterparts in Germany and Israel, among others. Together, they constitute a global bureaucracy of surveillance, with occasional collaboration with the independent Russian and Chinese agencies. However, while surveillance is the domain of the state, the total loss of privacy is mainly the result of the practice of Internet companies such as Google, Yahoo, Amazon, Facebook, and Twitter. These companies retrieve and store data about all of our communications, sometimes with our forced consent — we need their services because they are an oligopoly — and sometimes without it. In principle, they aggregate our data without personal identifying information, but the advertising we receive relentlessly in our electronic addresses is customized, and so someone enabled the advertisers to personalize content for our tastes, preferences, and behavior. However, not all of this is the fault of the Internet, because a key source of the data is the digitization of everything, starting with our bank cards, that tells the story of our life in minute detail. It is the formation of a digital exhaust by the linkage between all our digital traces that provides the basis of this panopticon, resulting largely from the exchange of data between different corporations and ultimately the state itself. Nonetheless, the digital panopticon is not an overwhelmingly dictatorial system, because people are still able to communicate in a horizontal manner, and even to rebel and mount political challenges, as we have witnessed, particularly since 2010, in multiple countries around the world. We can say that a new form of social movement has been born, the networked social movement, with extraordinary impacts in political processes. But this says nothing about the ideological orientation of these movements, as extreme right movements have taken advantage of these autonomous networks at least as much as progressive social movements have. Technology does not create the content of the behavior of the actors in the networks. It amplifies its effect. Thus, the simplistic debate between utopians and dystopians blocks our understanding of the key communication technology of our lives. Because, as in all technologies in history, in the first stage of their development there is a reaction of fear of the unknown, particularly among the older generations, overwhelmed by the proliferation of machines that they ignore. These fears are deepened by the mass media because only bad news is news, and because of the potential existential threat to traditional media, from the press to television, that is posed by social media. Traditional media have a vested interest in delegitimizing social media as a form of reliable information and communication. And so, our world has entered the Internet galaxy at full speed without awareness of its implications. Scholarly research, conducted in the usual conditions of intellectual independence and rigorous methodology, is the only way to clarify the issues at stake, as a precondition to designing appropriate policies and legislation that could eventually restore human control over new, powerful machines and people's autonomy vis-à-vis the proprietary networks of communication. This is why the field of Internet studies is essential for the construction of human consciousness in our contemporary context. And this is why this book that summarizes, updates, and theorizes critical research findings on Internet and society is a necessary guide to address key dilemmas of our time. Manuel Castells, Los Angeles and Barcelona, March 2019. Preface. As we completed this second edition of Society and the Internet had reached over half of the world's population. There was surprisingly little fanfare for such a major milestone. To the contrary, there was concern that the rate of the Internet's diffusion was slowing, an inevitable pattern in the diffusion of all innovations. But more alarming was the rise of increasingly major concerns over the societal implications of the Internet and related media, information, and communication technologies. Pundits argued that social media was destroying democracy, big data was undermining our privacy, screens were affecting the health and sociability of children, artificial intelligence, AI, would kill jobs, states were engaged in World War Web, and the Internet and web were fragmenting as the balkanization of the global information system speeded up. As Manuel Castells elucidates in the foreword to this book, this is part of an enduring utopian-dystopian dialogue about the societal implications of the Internet and related media and communication technologies. However, what is somewhat different about these debates from past hopes and concerns about technology is the degree to which they are current rather than future issues. That is, concerns at a level bordering on panic have emerged around actual developments, such as revelations about government surveillance, massive data breaches, and disinformation campaigns. Has the dystopian narrative been proven right? Alternatively, are such concerns based on overly simplistic and often deterministic logics that do not withstand the scrutiny of empirical and theoretically sophisticated analyses? We hope this book's collection of research will help you answer such questions. This book, as Manuel Castells points out, is an attempt to bring independent, disinterested, and empirically informed research to bear on key questions. We want to show the listener how research is being conducted in central domains of Internet research, demonstrating a breadth of theoretical and methodological approaches to developing understanding about the societal implications of the Internet. Each author was tasked with not just laying out key disagreements or debates, but also explaining how they interrogate them. We hope this collection therefore conveys the significance of varying perspectives on the Internet and brings Internet studies alive for anyone who seeks to understand the many ways in which the Internet is impacting, co-constituting, and being impacted by society. Central to understanding the role of the Internet in society is to focus on not just its material, but also its discursive power. Visions of the Internet have always been a critical driving force behind its development. Ted Nelson, the person who coined the term hypertext, has been a critic of the design of the web and many other information technologies. He explained the failure of so many technical designs by famously saying, "Techies have created the world in their image. I believe today's computer world is a result of techie misunderstandings of human life and human thought. Despite spectacular advances, there remains much room for improvement." But utopian visions of the Internet live on and continue to be a force driving individuals, companies, and governments to invest in its potential. As the first edition of this book was nearing completion, we learned of the death of Douglas C. Engelbart, 1925 to 2013, an engineer and one of the first scholars to envision a future in which computers and telecommunications would be networked worldwide in ways that could augment human intelligence. In 1962, over 50 years ago, he started work on the design of what he called an online system, NLS, which he demonstrated in 1968, 1 year after his team invented the mouse, a device that has since changed the ways in which people interact with computers. He was one of many pioneers who helped shape what we have come to know as the Internet, the web, and related digital technologies ranging from telecommunications infrastructures to tablets, smartphones, and voice search. He was inspired by earlier pioneers such as Vannevar Bush and J.C.R. Licklider, who called for a global system and in turn inspired others such as Ted Nelson, who conceived and developed the concept of hypertext to describe the nonlinear pathways that can link digital text and images, and which move away from the model of a linear book. As we were working on the second edition of this book in 2018, Another Internet pioneer passed away, but one of a very different sort. Not an engineer, but a poet and essayist, and a lyricist for the Grateful Dead, as well as a cattle rancher. John Perry Barlow founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation, dedicated to protecting digital rights, and in 1996 penned one of the early Internet's most utopian visions, a declaration of the independence of cyberspace. The declaration boldly proclaimed, "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather." The declaration, in other words, introduced the idea that the Internet could allow its users to transcend many of the world's pre-existing material constraints. Such early visions of what would become the Internet of the 21st century were formed when computing was out of the reach of all but a few organizations. Engelbart's vision was developed when nearly all computing was conducted on large mainframe computers that were so expensive and complex that only large organizations and governments possessed them. In the 60s, the very idea that households, much less individuals in their pockets, would have access to a computer networked with billions of other computers around the world was viewed as folly, completely unrealistic blue-sky futurology. Ironically, even Barlow's ideas of the 1990s were developed when mobile computing was still a far distant dream for the general public. And yet, today, a majority of humanity takes the Internet, often via a mobile device, for granted as a central feature of and tool in use for everyday life and work. Of course, many pioneers followed in the steps of Engelbart, Barlow, and other early visionaries and developed the technologies and visions that have shaped access to information, people, and services in the 21st century. They include Vint Cerf and Robert Kahn, inventors of the protocols that define the Internet, and Tim Berners-Lee and his team at CERN, who invented the World Wide Web. Of course, there are many more, too many to list. But the most unsung pioneers of the Internet are its users, people like you who use, view, mediate, edit, make, and therefore profoundly change the ways that much contemporary knowledge is circulated and recirculated, and communication is enacted and used. This book provides many examples of how users have shaped and continue to shape the development of the Internet and its application across nearly every sector of society, always coming back to the key issue of what difference the Internet makes in all aspects of our lives. Influential pioneers in the design and development of the Internet, like Doug Engelbart, understood the importance of users. As computing moved from large mainframes to personal computers to the Internet becoming your computer, it became clear that users were playing a major role in shaping the Internet in ways many of its designers could not have imagined. For example, many did not foresee the Internet becoming so widely embedded in core activities of everyday life, from correspondence to banking and shopping. It was originally designed to share computing resources in the computer science community. In a personal conversation about cybersecurity, one of the key engineers involved in developing the Internet argued that, to paraphrase him, if he had known how the Internet would develop, he would not have designed it as he did. Fortunately, the Internet was designed as it was, which led to its becoming one of the most transformative technologies of the 21st century. Likewise, while the Internet was developed originally to support collaboration and sharing among computer scientists, few early developers would have anticipated the ways in which crowdsourcing, tapping the wisdom of Internet users distributed across the globe, has enabled users to play more important roles in science and society in what has been called citizen science. Who would have envisioned, for instance, that people from all over the world would edit Wikipedia, averaging about 1.7 edits per second around the clock? However, even with enormous numbers of people being creators and makers on the Internet, huge inequalities remain in terms of who gets to have a voice there and what is represented. As new uses evolve, there is a need for even greater ingenuity and creativity on the part of developers and users alike to address the problems and risks of the digital age. In the half-century since Engelbart envisioned an NLS, the promise of the Internet, web, and related digital information and communication technologies to truly augment human intelligence has become evident, but so has the centrality of a global Internet to such valued outcomes as freedom of expression, privacy, equality, and democratic accountability. The visions and the work of the John Perry Barlows, as well as the Douglas Engelbarts of this world, continue to be needed as much as ever. In fact, most debates over such central values as freedom of expression in the 21st century are about the Internet. It is important to recognize that present-day concerns, such as those over disinformation, are not new. Well before the 21st century, many people considered the potential societal implications of computing and telecommunications enabled by digital technologies. As early as 1973, computer scientists such as Kelly Gottlieb began to write about some of the key social issues of computing, such as the implications for freedom of expression, privacy, employment, education, and security. Most of these issues remain critical today. In the early 1970s, Gottlieb and others discussed the idea of an information utility, analogous to other utilities, such as those for electricity or water. They were well aware of J.C.R. Licklider's call for a global network, even though ARPANET, the early incarnation of what would become the Internet, was only at the demonstration stage at the time they wrote, and governments were the primary adopters of computing and electronic data processing systems. Nevertheless, the issues defined as early as the 1970s remain remarkably key to discussions of the Internet, big data, social media, and mobile Internet over 40 years later. As the second edition of this book was nearing completion, the world was only beginning to recover from a moral panic over the rise of fake news, the fear of filter bubbles and echo chambers, and a declining trust in the Internet to deliver on its promise. Major changes have occurred across the decades and even since this book's first edition. Two are absolutely fundamental in introducing this edition. First, the Internet has increasingly been perceived as a serious threat. In the Internet's early years, it was an interesting innovation, but viewed as of no particular importance by many in government, business and industry, and society. With its continued and rapid diffusion into and out of the dot-com bubble of 2001, the Internet came to be viewed as a fountain of benign innovation in democratic governance and everyday life. The Internet, web, and social media came to be viewed as the harbingers of worldwide transformation to more distributed, collaborative governance, the end of hierarchy and the death of dictators. But within a decade after the millennium, dramatic events began to challenge positive visions of the Internet's role. To many, WikiLeaks came to be viewed as a threat to governance rather than a tool for accountability. The release of secrets by Edward Snowden fueled visions of worldwide surveillance rather than distributed intelligence. Social media came to be viewed as a Trojan horse to democracies targeted by malevolent and possibly state-supported actors, a tool for propaganda and misinformation. Thus, to paraphrase Albert Teich's summary of perspectives on technology in general, the Internet has come full circle, from having no particular effect to being an unalloyed blessing to being an unmitigated disaster, all in the course of a few decades. Secondly, in contrast to the early years as we moved into the second decade of the 21st century, the Internet had become an infrastructure of everyday life and work for much of the world. It is no longer seen as simply a virtual or cyber space beyond the realm of the material world. It is instead an embedded, augmented layer and infrastructure of contemporary societies. As such, instead of a Barlow-esque vision of a domain of life in which the old rules no longer apply, we see ways in which people, organizations, and states with economic, social, and political power use the Internet to amplify their reach. The Internet has become so widely diffused and pervasive that we are no longer simply relegated to debating competing visions of the societal implications of this technological innovation. We are in a place in which the actual societal implications of one of the most significant technologies of our lifetimes can be seriously studied. In doing so, students of the Internet and society need not just to stop at understanding the dynamics of our contemporary digitally mediated world, but to build on those understandings to develop new, fairer, and more just digital utopias. As AI, even bigger data, new forms of human interaction with computers, and ever-increasing mobility, enabling access from anywhere to anywhere at any time, change how we interact with each other, we need to make sure that we always look to not just where we are heading, but also where we might want to be, on the basis of normative forecasts. Nascent movements around initiatives like data justice, platform cooperatives, digital unions, and a decolonized Internet are just some of the ways in which emerging visionaries are trying to forge a better digital future. The central mission of this book is to offer a base from which the next generation of scholarship, policy, and visions can be constructed. It aims to show you how a multidisciplinary range of scholars seek to empirically and theoretically understand the social roles of the Internet. It is in this spirit that this book brings to bear a variety of methodological approaches to the empirical study of the social shaping of the Internet and its implications for society. Are those developing and using the Internet creating a system that augments human intelligence, as Engelbart envisioned? Will the Internet be designed and governed to support freedom of information, as Barlow envisioned? Are we using the Internet in ways that undermine social relationships and the quality and diversity of information resources required for economic, social, and political development? What difference is the Internet making to the quality of our lives, and how can this role be further enhanced in the future? What people, places, groups, and institutions have been able to derive the most benefit from the Internet, and who, what, and where have been left out? Who gets to control, create, and challenge new flows of information in our networked lives? And how are those flows of information used to entrench, amplify, or challenge economic, social, and political power? In the years and decades to come, the answers to these questions will be driven in part by the quality of research on the social shaping of the Internet and its implications for society. We hope this book helps engage you in that enterprise. For this collection is designed to show how these questions can be addressed. It presents a stimulating set of readings grounded in theoretical perspectives and empirical research. It brings together research that examines some of the most significant cultural, economic, political, and other social roles of the Internet in the 21st century in creative ways. Contributors and topics were selected to introduce some of the most engaging and groundbreaking scholarship in the burgeoning multidisciplinary field of Internet studies. In this spirit, the chapters are rooted in a variety of disciplines, but all directly tackle the powerful ways in which the Internet is linked to transformations in contemporary society. We hope this book will be the starting point for some students, but valuable to anyone with a serious interest in the economic, social, and political factors shaping the Internet and its impact on society. Introduction. William H. Dutton and Mark Graham. This chapter provides an introduction to this edited collection for all those interested in critical social aspects of the Internet and related digital media and technologies. The chapter explains the significance of multidisciplinary perspectives on the implications of the Internet in contexts ranging from everyday life to governance, and provides an overview of how the subsequent chapters address some of the big questions for study of society and the Internet. How is society being shaped by the diffusion and increasing centrality of Internet use in government, politics, business and industry, and everyday life? This collection addresses this question through a stimulating set of essays grounded in theoretical perspectives and empirical research. It brings together research that examines significant cultural, economic, political, and other social roles of the Internet.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?